the center of gravity hinges around the United States of America. America, without a doubt, is a dominant economic, political, and a cultural force. And to all those naysayers who challenge that, they're seeing the results of that, right? So this is not necessarily a pro-America or a pro-world position. It is just rooted in fact. Now, what American policymakers decide for often domestic or global policy has a clear and a direct impact, not just on industries, but on markets and governments worldwide. And we at AccountAbility have been very aware of that.
Joining me today in Washington, D.C. is Sunil Misser, CEO of AccountAbility, international consulting and standards firm. Sunil, you've joined us many, many times to discuss corporate sustainability and business strategy. We look forward to having another conversation.
First of all, Matt, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here. And thank you to Wes and the entire team. We've been doing this for over a decade, well over a decade. And I can still tell you, it is with absolute enthusiasm and pleasure that I look forward to coming and seeing you. So thank you once again to Steve, Nareit, and the rest of the team.
And it certainly has been a number of years that we've been talking. And each time we meet, we like to look back at earlier conversations that we've had to reflect on what was previously discussed and predicted to sort of understand how things have panned out. Last time we spoke, you shared the 7 trends that AccountAbility believed were shaping corporate sustainability. How have you seen those trends progress? Where have you seen continuity as expected? And where, if at all, have you been surprised by what's unfolded?
I would say, just to pick about 3 big trends, and we've seen how we've seen them play out. The first one was around the new G in ESG. It was geopolitics, right? And need I say anything over the last 30 months as to how geopolitics has played an outsized role in the business environment. And there is a transition from geopolitics to geoeconomics, which I'll speak about later. But I think it was about 2023 when I mentioned that the World Economic Forum had released the latest report on global risks. And there was one statement that made headlines. And it said, and I paraphrase, something to the effect of, we're standing at the edge of a low-growth, low-cooperation era. Sad, but true. We've seen that economic policy is more and more being used defensively by countries looking to shore up on their natural and other resources under the name of self-sufficiency. But this is creating a very different kind of new national security economic policy. The second trend that we had predicted was around stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement was getting louder, and stakeholder engagement, we're seeing more than ever, is here to stay. Okay, I think there was a recent survey done by GlobeScan. I think it's a research organization, 2024, of the investor relations function, investor relations board, corporate secretaries of board, et cetera. And they had interviewed, I think, about 227 representatives from over 43, 45 countries. 7 out of 10 clearly stressed and underscored the fact that when it comes to corporate affairs, business development, business strategies, boards, the dominating theme in their discussions is stakeholder engagement. That's up from 5 out of 10 a year ago. And the third trend we had talked about is boards, building more effective, future-focused boards. And typically there are 3 levers of board governance. One is a disciplined enforcement of term limits. The second one is a regular capacity and capability review. And the third one is relevant training and development. We're seeing all 3 of these levers being used semi-judiciously, but rather aggressively and robustly, right? And this leads to what we had put out as our, methodology in terms of how we see boards and markets, DIRE. DIRE stands for diversity, independence, refreshment, and expertise. And we're seeing that at play across boardrooms around the world.
Sunny, as we sit here, it's early May. It certainly has been an interesting start to 2025. We've seen both businesses and consumers grapple with continued inflation, market uncertainty, and worry about global supply chains as a result of issues surrounding trade alliances and tariffs. How are you seeing business leaders rethink their strategy in response to a seemingly volatile yet highly complex global environment?
That's an interesting question, Matt, because we're certainly living in challenging times. When you look at the environment that we're living in, we're looking at stagnant economies, we're looking at rising unemployment, we're looking at stubborn inflation, and against all of this, there's a backdrop, and the backdrop is huge geopolitical tensions, soaring costs of energy, disrupted supply chains, and all of this is leading to an inflection point. It's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just what is happening. I'm not necessarily saying that there is going to be a dire outcome as a result of this, but there is going to be a couple of alternative options that'll emerge. And when you look at the uncertainty in countries and economies around the world, one thing is becoming certain. When you look at that inflection point, the center of gravity hinges around the United States of America. America, without a doubt, is a dominant economic, political, and a cultural force. And to all those naysayers who challenge that, they're seeing the results of that, right? So this is not necessarily a pro-America or a pro-world position. It is just rooted in fact. Now, what American policymakers decide for often domestic or global policy has a clear and a direct impact, not just on industries, but on markets and governments worldwide. And we at AccountAbility have been very aware of that because we have a lot of global exposure, both in terms of our offices, our people, and most importantly, our clients around the world. So as a result of this, we conducted a very extensive survey. And the survey was with over about 70 individuals who were all chief sustainability officers of Fortune 1000 companies, large companies. And 30, 35 of them actively participated in interviews, others gave their opinions. And there were certain themes that emerged, both about the United States of America, but more importantly, about how it would impact the world. One was what we called the Trump test. So Matt, if we look at the Trump test, for example, we have just surpassed, I believe, over 100 days of his presidency as we speak. In those 100 days, just 100 days plus, he has signed more than 150 executive orders. That has eclipsed any precedent in the last 80 years prior. Now, I don't know the consequences of all of that. It's going to be unpredictable. But there is a certainty that something will evolve as a result of that. And if you look at the Trump effect as to how it impacts sustainability, the sustainability strategies that companies have deployed, by and large, both as a result of research and survey, have still remained the same and unchanged. 2 out of 3 individuals that we've surveyed said that they have remained steadfast. But the messaging has changed. So the messaging will be now more about materiality or managing risks or innovation or reporting or disclosure. So you're seeing a shift in how you market, communicate, and message as opposed to what you actually do. And that is the Trump effect. And that's real and it's going to happen. The second factor that I discussed was the Brussels effect. Clearly, there has been a huge proliferation of global standards and reporting frameworks. There are a few that we have seen that have dominated. Besides SASB and the ISSB, 90% of those people that we interviewed and respondents said that they were preparing, in fact, for the CSRD, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive out of the EU. It is burdensome, it is cumbersome, it is expensive, it is very resource driven, but it still seems to be the de facto reporting and disclosure standard of choice for the majority of corporations in the Fortune 1000 space. So Brussels is, despite all this talk about isolationism and protectionism, it is still dominating the discussion when it comes to reporting standards. The third trend is around what we call from the sideline to the bottom line. And it's extremely clear that in this current economy, and the economy likely to be the economy of the future, organizations are placing an increasing emphasis on ensuring that there is a return on investment, there is a financial underpinning, both in terms of metrics and measures, to any and all sustainability efforts. So there's a whole range of things you can do to make sure that happens. And then the next thing is what we call the supply chain black box. What we mean by supply chain black box? Well, we have made several advances in the supply chain area. Good, consistent data that is reliable, accurate, and predictable remains elusive. Okay, and the use of technology can certainly help standardize and streamline that. But Scope 3 emissions are still one of the biggest issues that we're looking at. And if you look at Scope 3 emissions, they are not measured in a reliable, consistent, and a balanced manner. And so the supply chain area needs a little bit of work. There's going to be a constant pressure from procurement to lower costs. And that's the one aspect you're seeing that's in play. But there are many other facets to that. When it comes to green finance, we've tried to simplify it. There is a lot of complexity in government-funded schemes around access to green financing. And when you look at the policy implications or the tax implications surrounding them, they're increasingly difficult to navigate. So companies are going to need, especially smaller companies with less resources, are going to need much more assistance in navigating through this maze. So, easier, accessible, understandable, and implementable forms of green finance is certainly one trend that you're going to see more. It's currently probably, I would say, more at nascent stage, but you're going to see more development as you go by.
So with those 5 factors as a backdrop, what will successful leaders and organizations need to do to move forward in corporate sustainability and in business broadly over the next 3 to 5 years?
It's a big question. We have tried to synthesize it into 3 simple steps. And obviously there's much more than these 3 steps. But we call it the 3 C's. So it's collaborate, calibrate, and commercialize. Now, what do I mean by collaborate? It's not just collaborating with external stakeholders, but it's doing so in a structured and a planned, organized way. But it's also to learn how to collaborate across the silos, interdepartmental, interfunctional, within the business. A lot of businesses don't talk to each other effectively within their operations. Right? And we're seeing that across all clients we see. Collaborating with industry networks, yes, collaborating with peers as and when appropriate, competing when necessary, collaborating when necessary, and figuring out tailored partnerships that are integral to the business, what makes sense for the business. Now, as far as calibration is concerned, I think all companies, when it comes to sustainability, probably need to stress test or refresh their materiality frameworks in context of the risks and the opportunities in the landscape of today. In addition to that, I think there are significant data gaps that can be looked towards closing and re-strengthening the frameworks that they have for disclosure, for reporting, and for general corporate governance and enterprise-wide governance. So when you look at that, then comes the final C, commercialization. Commercialization has been not just a nice to have, but it's become a have to have, right? So one has to look at integrated, innovative ways that are resilient for the long term to make money. And I mean, there's probably a more polished way of saying this, but if you can't generate revenue on a long-term sustained basis, okay, and you can find different ways of doing that, it's not going to work.
All right, Sunny, I'd like to end by asking you to put your big picture hat on again. Can you give me the top 3 risks that you see businesses facing today and tomorrow?
I would classify risks into 3 large buckets. One of them is for the lack of a better word, geopolitical, soon to transition to geoeconomic. So it starts off as geopolitical risks in its purest sense, which are risks, but then they very quickly manifest themselves into geoeconomic outcomes, which are terrible. The second one is, for the lack of a better word, a broad bucket called environmental. And the third risk is technology. And we can go through these one by one to perhaps get better clarity on what it really means. Just let's take that first risk bucket, geopolitical risk, right? And it's always interesting because people get very bent out of shape when they talk about risks, when they look at the probability of a risk or the frequency of a risk. I tend to look at the intensity or the impact of the risk. Probability is important, likelihood of occurrence and frequency is important. But even something that is not very likely to occur, but if it does occur, it wipes you out, should be taken seriously, right? So when you look at geopolitical risks, I think the single largest risk, and you're seeing it in action, and I'm not going to call out names, is the risk of state-backed armed conflict. And you're seeing that not just in one or two, but in multiple parts of the world. And it seems to be a trend that's sadly growing. The other one is what I call commercial aggression. Now, it can start very mildly with policies, and then it can go to sort of subsidies. So you're just making sure your policies get through. But then it can quickly escalate. It can escalate to tariffs and sanctions and possibly embargoes. So there is a whole range or a spectrum of what I call that sort of commercial warfare or aggression. And then the third risk under geopolitical terms that I see as real and distinct is a gradual erosion of civic freedoms. And on the other hand is extreme loss of human rights. But you don't have to get to the loss of human rights to start losing freedoms. And very soon you're looking at a very different algorithm of governance, right? Now, how will these geopolitical risks map into geoeconomic risks? It's very clear. One, some, or all, or more of these has a direct impact on several factors on which economies and countries and markets run. First and foremost, the access to and the cost of energy is controlled by these factors. Disruption of supply chains and thereby resilience of supply chains is a big part of that. What does that cause? What does conflict cause? Mass migrations of people. Okay? Displacement, involuntarily, displacement of people. And all of this results in secondary or tertiary economic impacts. Inflation, unemployment, the cost of capital, cost of money, cost of borrowing, the amount of investment inflows in a country suddenly dry up. And all of this, in an aggregate sense, causes an economic downturn. So I would say, that geopolitical linking to geoeconomic risk is the single largest risk that we face across the board. So next are the buckets of the environment and technology. See, most people tend to focus on the environment as connecting it to extreme weather events. And I think that's the more fashionable term these days, as opposed to climate change, right? Extreme weather events are not just occasional occurrences. They are sadly a predictable and a routine occurrence, right? Now, if you combine that with the loss of biodiversity, increasing pollution, air, water, and soil, right? And a depletion of natural resources. And when I talk natural resources, I'm not talking minerals, I'm talking food, I'm talking water, right? All of this in an aggregate sense, whether it's pollution, depletion of natural resources, biodiversity loss, extreme weather events, creates a collapse of an ecosystem. And what that creates in return, I have no idea. And the final area is that of technology, the technology bucket. One can always think about the multiple risks that the advances in technology pose. I think there is a more important consideration, what is causing these risks? If you look at technology, there are three basic factors that are driving change. One is increased connectivity, greater connectivity around the world, doesn't matter where you go. People are very connected to each other and to the internet, right? And almost exponential growth in computing power as we speak, right? Computers today are like 10 times faster than computers a few years ago. And then there is an advancement of artificial intelligence. The consequences or the confluence of these three forces will not just result in increased cybercrime or issues of cybersecurity. Those can be managed and they're being actively looked at. I would be more concerned about biotechnology, bioengineering, and bioweapons. There's an old proverb in the East, and there are lots of different groups in the East that can lay claim to that. But we must learn to plant seeds for trees that will then grow under whose shade we will never be resting under.
Sunny, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
Well, Matt, the sentiment is entirely mutual. I truly enjoy coming to DC, meeting you, your team, and the wonderful people of Nareit. And this has become a bit of a ritual. And I really hope that we can keep it into this next decade. And thank you for your time, and thanks to all the crew that you have here.